Humic substances are naturally occurring substances. They're ubiquitous in almost all soils and waterways around the world. And really what you have is groups of microorganisms are what generate these humic substances, particularly fungal groups. So what happens is these fungal groups consume free organic matter in the soil. And as they do that, they excrete these humic acids into the environment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Wisenetix Podcast episode. Today, I have as a guest speaker here with me, Reid. Joel is going to be sharing some of his history and experience in agriculture. He is founder and CEO of Greenwave Enterprises, and he has an extended background in the industry with more than 23 years of experience, including, being in a agriculture-rooted family. And today he's going to be sharing more about humic substances industry and the importance of that for soil health and crop production. Welcome, Joel.
Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you for coming. Joel, for us to start, you are in a family of farmers or people involved in agriculture. Could you start the conversation sharing some memorable experiences, memories that you had from your early days and that influenced your approach, to your work today?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. It'd be my pleasure. There's a pretty good memory that stands out actually as a kid. My grandfather, Joe Spence, started a company called Mesa Verde Resources in the early 70s, which was a humate and humic acid product manufacturing company. And, I remember pretty early on going into his garage in his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where was sort of the hub of the business. He and my grandmother ran it from their house. And going into the garage to get a soda from the refrigerator. And I don't remember if I was allowed to be doing that at the time, but what I do remember is seeing on his homemade wooden workbench in the garage there just under the window, kind of these beakers and test tubes of what I didn't know then were humic acid extracts. And this very cool kind of dark red amber colored liquid reflecting in the sunlight in these beakers and tubes. And at that time, just sort of questioning him about what that was, and beginning to learn about it back then. So that definitely stands out to me. And also visiting the humate manufacturing plant, which, if you've ever been to one, it's a lot like being probably near a coal mine. There's black dust everywhere, and it's in your clothes and up your pant leg and into your boots and everywhere. And so those are some of my earliest memories of him running that business and really breaking into the industry as one of the leaders at that time.
That's lovely. It's incredible, like how childhood memories and they have this thing on us, right? And maybe that was the spark, the beginning of your curiosity, and how what helped driving you where you are today. And Joe, I think we can start there. Can you share a little bit more about Mesa Verde, your previous experiences in the industry, and how everything brought you to where you are today with Greenwave Enterprises and the solutions you're having?
Sure. Yeah. I mentioned my grandpa, Joe Spence. It's on my dad's side, my dad being Bruce Reid. As I said, Joe started Mesa Verde in the early 70s. He had a friend with a Cessna that was hired by Peabody Coal to fly around northwestern New Mexico over BLM and Navajo and private land areas looking for coal deposits. And he asked my grandpa Joe if he wanted to go for a ride and help him. And Joe said, sure. So they start seeing these kind of black deposits down on the ground. And Joe's asking him, what's this? What's this? And his friend says, no, that's humate. That's not what we're looking for. And so my grandpa, being naturally inquisitive, begins to school himself on what humate is. And he started Mesa Verde at that time with a couple of friends, a front end loader, a bulldozer, financed a crusher mill, and a 50-pound bagger, and they spent 3 days learning how to mine humate in the field a week, and the other 3 days a week crushing and bagging humate for his very earliest customers at that time. And so, into the 80s and 90s, there was a little bit more awareness about humates and humic substances in agriculture, but it was very, very slow growth at that time. So he kind of plugged along, and in 1999, my dad, Bruce, left the oil business. He's a petroleum geologist, and decided to come help Joe run the company and maybe try to modernize it a little bit. And it seems like in the early 2000s, it was still very much a niche industry, but it began to gain a little bit more momentum. And so my dad finally convinced me to come on board and join the two of them in 2001 and sort of help run Mesa Verde from the production side of things, not so much the sales side of things. So that's really what got me into the industry. And as I say, it's kind of feels deeply rooted with my family, and particularly in that region of the Southwest, for sure.
How about Green Wave Enterprises? What exactly are you guys providing as solutions? And including this question, for our listeners that are not familiar with Humic solutions, can you share a little bit more about what it is and why it is relevant for soil health and crop production?
Sure. I did spend 23 years with Mesa Verde. That business was later rebranded and sort of reorganized by new ownership. And so I found myself deciding whether or not I wanted to operate as an independent. And I thought, this is what I know how to do. It's what I'm familiar with. I'm not interested in trying to get into any other fields. And so I'm going to launch Green Wave Enterprises and carry on providing these humic products to the industry, to the marketplace. The humic substances are naturally occurring substances. They're ubiquitous in almost all soils and waterways around the world. And really what you have is groups of microorganisms are what generate these humic substances, particularly fungal groups. So what happens is these fungal groups consume free organic matter in the soil. And as they do that, they excrete these humic acids into the environment. And as their bodies die, their cells release these carbon-based acids into the soil environment. So this is Mother Nature's design. These substances exist in nature for a multitude of purposes and functions that they serve. And so, there's been decades and decades of research on humic substances, but I really feel like that awareness has grown, I'd say, over the last 20 years, particularly over the last 5 to 7, very much so. And so we know that in terms of nutrient availability to crops, health of beneficial microorganisms in the soil, extremes in soil pH, salt pressures, all these kinds of things, humic substances lend a very, very important hand in remediating these types of things and creating an optimal conditions in the soil for crops to thrive. So there's a lot of white papers on the subject, but I can sort of get into a little bit more detail on, for example, how they increase nutrient uptake, if that's something that you think would be interesting for listeners.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And one curiosity that I have is that these humic substances, as you mentioned, it's Mother Nature's work, right? Uh, is there a lack of those substances when you have like I don't know if that's the best expression in English, but in Portuguese we would say monoculture or single culture if you're just planting, I don't know, corn or soybean. Is this would this cause a lack of humic substances because you don't have other, I don't know, other plants or animals and those sort of things? How does that work? This is a newbie, like a no experienced person asking. So sorry if it sounds stupid, but
Not at all. I think it's fair to say that I think our best management practices and our stewardship of the soil in modern agriculture is sort of responsible for a reduction in soil carbon levels and a reduction in humic substances. You know, for example, if we tend to lash the soil with high levels of synthetic nitrogen, we upset the balance or the ratio that is the healthy ratio between carbon and nitrogen in the soil, which is actually 10.4 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So when we sort of use salt-based fertilizers, we tend to damage the microorganisms that are in the soil. We do so with things like fungicides, and these are things that can be deemed essential in raising a crop, but we know that we are damaging our soil health and degrading those carbon levels as we've, been practicing what we might call modern agriculture. And so humic substances do exist, and we can employ practices that reduce levels of them. And so we view humic products as sort of a catalyst to replenish those humic substances and those carbon levels in the soil. When we apply humic products in the field, we provide a very strong stimulant for beneficial microorganisms. These microbes, being bacterial and fungal colonies, are very much responsible for driving the soil chemistry, things like soil pH, nutrient availability, being able to deal with salt pressures that might exist or disease pressures. So when we provide humic substances at, say, levels of 10 to 50 parts per million in the soil, what we're really doing is creating the proper substrate or foundation for these beneficial microbes to flourish. When we have things like disease pressure, by fostering beneficial microorganisms in the soil, we can actually out compete and overwhelm pathogens. There's kind of two things that happen when we sort of bump up humic substances in the soil and increase carbon levels. One is we create a carbon storage battery for nutrients. So that's sort of the chemical side of what we're doing. Humic and fulvic acids have what we call functional groups on their molecules, and these functional groups chelate cations and anions. So any kind of fertilizer, nutrients that we're applying in the field, those cations, those positively charged nutrients, they're going to either bind to the clay particles in the soil or they're going to bind to humic substances. We want them to bind to humic substances because as the soil levels of that nutrient begin to deplete, these functional groups that we talk about on the humic acid molecules, they'll release that nutrient back into the environment and increase uptake into the plant. And so there's a number of things that are happening chemically as we increase humic substances. And then I keep mentioning microorganisms. We really can't talk about humic substances without talking about microbes, and vice versa. They go hand in hand. So, the biological side is that we stimulate these bacterial colonies by increasing humic substances and carbon levels in the soil so that those bacterial colonies can do things like mineralize, free up minerals through their digestive processes. And we have these fungal groups which are excreting and releasing these carbon-based acids on their own, sort of like mycorrhizal fungi colonizing on the root of a plant, they ask the plant for a little bit of sugar, and in return, they inject local nutrients into that root and then feed on that root like a salad. So it's very much a symbiotic relationship between the plants and these microorganisms. And when we can sort of bump up or build humus levels, humic substances, which is really what we're talking about, and carbon levels, then we foster that whole relationship, that whole beneficial spiral, if you will.
And how would you say is the result of the application of these humic substances to the final crop, the yield, and even the quality of the grains? Do we see like the impact on the quality? I don't know. Again, I'm not technical, so sorry if it sounds stupid, but I don't know, higher level of proteins on a soybean, for example. I'm not sure. What can we see as results of these applications?
Sure. Well, yeah, we always talk about increasing yields in agriculture, right? It's the big goal. But I think that you really touched on the more important aspect of that, which is the quality of the yield. And that comes from increased nutrient uptake. How is our soil health? If we have healthy soil, we have healthy plants, and then we have healthy people. So there's a lot of technologies, modern technologies that we have now that can allow us to create extremely high numbers of bushels of corn per acre.
Mm-hmm.
So the question really isn't anymore, how can we increase yield? The question is, how can we reduce yield loss? And when we bump up humic substances in the soil, we see these little battles that we win, like increasing lateral root growth, increasing the numbers of root hairs, root mass, improving overall plant response, reduction of pathogens in the soil, fractionating salts, which humic substances and microbes both do. And when we can start winning all of these sort of little battles in crop production, then we attain the big one, which is the yield, but not only yield, but as we've said, the quality of that yield.
That's probably one of the reasons for the growth of this industry. You mentioned that it's something that is definitely more in discussions lately in the past 5 to 10 years than what was before. What do you think is driving this awareness and the importance of this topic today?
I really think it's become, especially in the last decade, more of a grassroots type of pressure from the ground up, pun intended, where producers, farmers are saying, look, these conventional methods that we've employed for decades they're not cutting it anymore. We find ourselves waiting for the next chemical savior and the next chemical savior for this problem that we've created in the soil. And so growers are going to their co-ops, they're going to their ag retailers, they're going to their suppliers and saying, we need you guys to help us find another solution. We've got to start thinking outside the box. What can we do? And time and again, particularly in the last decade or so, that's led to discussions about humates and humic products, because they say, well, let's do a thumbprint. Give me your worst circle. Let's do a low application of humic substances on your porous ground and see what we come up with. And really, the poorer the soil, the more dramatic those results are. And we begin to realize, and as we do our homework online, recognize the importance of these humic substances in crop production. So we begin to see the industry grow, and it certainly has.
That's interesting. And how do you see how are growers, farmers perceiving this? What I mean here is you might have some early adopters, the farmers, growers that are open-minded and ready to test new solutions, and some others that might be more conservatives and that trust more on the traditional or modern methods of our agriculture. How do you handle with this? How do you address the solutions within these groups?
It's always an uphill climb for sure, and it was very much a niche industry, even up into the early 2000s. I think it was under 200 million in the market as a whole globally. We see that number closer to 500 million in 2023 on the global humic market, and it's projected by 2032 to grow up to 1.1 to 1.9 billion. So I really feel like around 2010 to 2012, we sort of hit this tipping point in the industry as far as humic products awareness in the industry. And you could say, maybe on the downhill slope of that, gaining momentum. And with that momentum also comes a great responsibility. And that responsibility is to be clear that when we talk about humic substances with growers, with ag retailers, with fertilizer distributors at the wholesale level, that everything we talk about is based on sound science, that we don't use marketing tools to differentiate and say, well, our product is superior based on this marketing tool, which may be what we might call based on junk science. So anytime we have a conversation with either a producer or at the wholesale level, everything we talk about must be based on sound science. And so when we get a chance to have these conversations, we like to ask questions to sort of determine where's our pain points. Could it be fusarium on soybeans creating sudden death syndrome? Could it be clavibacter pressure on a corn crop, which is creating Goss's wilt? How can we remediate that and address this pathogenic pressure? And, I've talked about how humic substances stimulate beneficial microorganisms. Well, we can outcompete and overwhelm those pathogens by increasing humic substances in the soil to 10 to 50 parts per million or more. So we can literally change the nature of the biology in the soil and have a positive impact on that disease pressure. So it comes down to fostering trust. And we do that by having conversations that are based on sound science and not just trying to use marketing tools to differentiate ourselves, and making sure that we're available, as we create this thought leadership in the industry, that we make ourselves available to have these conversations that are so important, and that we provide that technical support as quickly as it's required in the field to tackle a problem. And when we do that and we make ourselves available, we provide that technical support and have those conversations, then we build a strong reputation. People can pick up pretty easily on whether or not you're interested in actually helping them to be more successful. If you're there to make a buck, people can tell that pretty much right away.
No, I loved it. It looks like a very an approach focused on education, and as you shared, thought leadership. You already shared some pieces about it on how you get in touch with growers, how you use real science to discuss those topics with them. But let's dive a little bit more into this about thought leadership. How do you see the importance of this educational approach? Maybe if you want to compare to the marketing approach, the traditional marketing salesy approach, and how do you look to implement this thought leadership to position as a trusted partner in the industry, to build your brand authority, let's say?
Yeah, brand authority can be important, and arguably, I'll be honest, really, if I discover that a customer, a producer, or someone at the wholesale level might be using a humic product from one of my competitors, great. I'm happy that they've got a humic product in their repertoire, that they're implementing that into a grower's fertility program is the most important thing. So, that doesn't really bother me at all. When we, form entities like the Humic Products Trade Association, which is a nonprofit, and my dad, Bruce Reid, was one of the co-founders. And it's sort of all of us competitors in the industry got together and formed this association. And the main drive there is what we've touched on, which is making sure that we're presenting information based on sound science. So let's not do things like use something like corn steep liquor in a product to bump up the humic acid analysis that the lab runs when they look at, say, a colorimetric analysis, which can happen. So we try to stay away from things that we call adulterants in these products. And we pledge to do that because we really do establish those relationships and those trusts that we build by providing information that's accurate and well researched and well thought out. And so it comes down to making ourselves available, whether it's through social media, through our distributors, which for GreenWave, we operate mostly at the wholesale level through distributors, making sure that those sales reps in those organizations are clear on what it is that we're trying to accomplish. That, I get a chance to have these conversations with those sales reps to make sure that they're clear when they go out into the field, because they're the boots on the ground that are really working directly with the producers. And so we want that information to make its way, that accurate information to make its way down to the consumer and the end user. And as we do that, that's how we build the reputation.
Awesome. And I loved how you brought this perspective of, even if growers are using products from other humic suppliers, they can be competitors. It's important because you're helping the industry somehow. It doesn't need just you guys having all the share of the market and providing the services to everyone, but seeing the impact in the industry and seeing the shift towards the solutions that make sense, right? I think that's always like, if your competitors are doing well, it means like, hey, the industry makes sense. What the service you're providing makes sense. There's space for growth. There's growth coming, and it's going to come for for people that are involved, for companies that are involved. So it's an interesting perspective. I really enjoyed it. And Joe, and looking ahead, so we had an interesting growth in the past 5 to 10 years. Looking ahead at the next 5 to 10 years, what do you envision for GreenWave and the humic industry as a whole?
Yeah, I briefly mentioned some numbers a little bit earlier, and again, it's something like $500 million this year globally for the humic products industry, and just within 8 years, by 2032, it's projected to be 1.1 to 1.9 billion. And so, again, I really feel like producers these days do their homework. They research online, they listen to these podcasts, they come to their suppliers and they say, hey, look, we need to think out of the box and come up with some new solutions to these pressures that we're facing as crop producers. Again, being on the sort of downward slope of being past that tipping point of awareness about humic products in the industry, it does come with a great responsibility. I only see it snowballing from here in terms of awareness of humic products, implementing humic products, and podcasts like these are a great way for people to get more educated and stay in touch with how they can become more successful. So I see only growth. Our population of the world is growing. We touched on it already. It's not just yield, it's quality of yield. When I sit down with my family at the dinner table and put a plate of food there for them, I want that food to have as much nutritional content and be as healthy as it can possibly be for them. We can feed the world and we can do it properly. And it does start in the soil.
Perfect. For us to wrap up here, Joel, if you had one piece of advice to give to entrepreneurs or even professionals in agriculture who are looking after, introducing new technologies, new solutions, what would this advice be?
I think, the most important thing as we operate as either an entrepreneur or whatever your business model might be is that it's the relationships. I can testify that, starting this new business as a startup this last year, that I wouldn't have been able to see the rapid growth that I did experience without having those relationships. The relationships with people in your industry are the most important thing. Fostering them, making sure that you do build that trust and that you can rely on each other. Hands down, that is number one.
Awesome. Okay, Joe, thank you so much for your time here today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'm not a technical guy, but I love learning new things like I've been learning Humic with you, not just today, but in our previous conversations as well. And if our listeners want to connect and learn more about the work you're doing, your services, what's the best channel for that?
Sure. You can find us on Facebook or Instagram looking for Greenwave Enterprises LLC. Feel free to email me at joel@greenwaveag.net. We've got our webpage under construction, so feel free to reach out. Love to hear from you.
That's awesome. Joe, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I'm sure that our audience did the same and had some new insights and got some interesting knowledge about, one of the most important things in our lives, which is agriculture and how we get our food. Joe, thanks you so much for our listeners that were here until now. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope to see you all in our next episode. Thank you, everyone. Bye.